All right, I am joined by Abby Levine from Outside and Kelly Newland from Rad Boulder. Abby broke the news earlier today about Tara Dower's new contract with Altra, and Kelly negotiated the deal. I read the reporting with great interest. I appreciate you both being here to go deeper into various parts of it. Abby, starting with you, how would you summarize the news here for people that have not read the article? What's sort of the headline and just some of the overhead details?
Headline is that it's the biggest contract that Altra has ever signed with an athlete. And what I find really exciting about that, and also what officials at Altra were psyched about, was obviously Tara is a woman. So having a woman be the one to trailblaze in that space for them and also for the industry. And I think some important context to add before we get into it is trail ultra running is quite a bit behind even track or road running. And so
Hmm.
I think more general fans of sports, especially if you're a football fan, you're not going to be impressed by this. If you're even a fan of track and field, you might not be impressed by this. And that's because I really think Tara's record on Appalachian Trail, it's like winning the gold medal at the Olympics for the sport of ultra trail running. And if you're winning a gold medal at the Olympics, you're making over $1 million a year from
Yeah.
sponsors. But so with those precautions aside, in the sport of ultra trail running, this contract is very impressive. It is a lot more money than she was making this year, thanks to Kelly and her amazing negotiating skills. And it's really this stamp of approval, both from Ultra, like recognizing how significant Tara's performance was on the AT. And what I found to be really interesting about this contract was it's also a belief in them in the future that they think that she has, especially
Hmm.
in racing.
Yeah. You added, I think, an important caveat that this was the biggest contract that Ultra has ever signed with a professional trail athlete. And Kelly, I was talking with you about this offline. As I survey the landscape, it's rare, but it's not totally uncommon to see other athletes in the space at this pay band. But what I also see as significant here is it's probably the first to be really publicly reported on and to receive so much engagement on social media than your standard sort of announcement post. I know it's a lot of speculation, but why so much interest here? And why was this the first one to get so much media attention?
Gosh, there's so many things that we could. I mean, like you said, it's all speculation, right? But I will say, uh, there's a lot. I have a lot of feedback, but I also one of my first gut responses is I don't know why it hasn't. It's one of those falls into that box of we haven't done it yet, and it's not a practice, so no one does it, and it just sort of takes someone to do it. And fortunately, Altra was on board to break this news in a very public way, and Abby was also on board to do it. So that sort of together just created this sort of steamroller vehicle to make this happen. And I will say this too, Finn, you and I were discussing it earlier. It might seem like, to a lot of people, well, Courtney, I'm sure Courtney gets paid more than this, or Killian, or fill in the blank. And I'm certain that they do, but Tara got to this actual amount within 1 year. If I wish I could disclose the contract she had before, I had nothing to do with that first one, but most people reach this six-figure point after they've gotten $50,000, $60,000, let's say as an annual base, and it was through their bonuses that they had rollover, hopefully, that brought them to a six-figure fruition. Tara did it in 1 year with nothing. There were no bonuses for her before. So this is truly unique in that way, which I think makes it a little bit easier to have like a launching pad to celebrate that.
I can also tell you from my perspective why I was interested in this story.
Please.
The first one is, while it's all speculation and we don't know exactly how much it is, I am pretty confident that it is in the top 5 of what ultra trail runners are making right now, just based off of what I've heard. And that I could be wrong, but that's the sense I'm getting. In addition to that, as a woman, I would say it's most likely in the top 3.
Okay.
And I think that there are a lot of hidden biases that really well-intentioned people don't even realize that they hold when it comes to athlete contracts. And it is a lot harder to be paid your worth as a woman in this sport than as a man. In addition to that, to piggyback off of what Kelly was saying, I found this story really compelling that it's a reflection of Tara's just meteoric rise through the sport. If you look at her results, she only started racing in 2021. She was good, but she wasn't winning, top tier one races. 2022, also good, not turning heads. Even 2023, winning Run Rabbit Run, while those really in the know find that impressive, nobody knows what that is outside of the inner core circle of ultra trail running. And even this morning, I ran into somebody who's not a runner on the trail, and she was like, "Oh, I've heard of Tara Dower. She set the record on the Appalachian Trail." It's the AT is one of those very few performances that transcends the sport. And I think that's easy to forget that if you're in the scene, but it was written up in the New York Times. You're winning Western states, that might not even be written up in the New York Times.
One of the questions I was going to ask this later, but this is a good time to bring it up. You look at Tara's contract and the health of it. Is this representative of maybe a broad statement that we no longer have as significant issues with gender-based pay inequality in the sport, or are there still serious issues to fix at various tiers in the brand-athlete relationship?
Oh, that's a great question. We can't there's no time to take your foot off the gas with this. This isn't like this is done and now we're moving on, the problem is solved, if that's kind of what you're asking, I think. Absolutely not. I think it's just a start, which is one of the reasons this is so important to report on and so important for Altra to be aware of as a brand. I suspect Abby agrees with me as well, but every tier, I've seen dozens of contracts every year of all different tiers, Finn, and from the same brands, athletes, parallel podiums, and there's an absolute difference in there. If anyone tells you any different, then I will tell them to call me. It's because it's not true. It's not done. Our work is not done on this, and until it is absolutely not an issue, we're not done, and it's never not going to be an issue.
Working through this story, the really tricky part was the non-disclosure agreements, and those are obviously written into contracts for a reason. It gives brands leverage over athletes. And in reporting the story, one thing that was really important to me was being as transparent as I was allowed to be, to empower other athletes to try to fight for their worth. And it's really tricky because maintaining a good relationship with Altra was really important in us even publishing the story. And at the same time, they fully recognize that the more they're willing to disclose, the better it looks for them. The more they can say, look how we're empowering our female athlete who just did this amazing athletic feat. That's great marketing, but they have a lot of competing values that they're also dealing with. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but I guess the more we can talk about this openly, the more it's going to benefit the athletes and long-term going to benefit the brands, I think.
Well, it reminds me, and I've always been curious, this is kind of a dumb question, but is the demand for non-disclosure more often than not coming from the brand, or is it coming from the athlete? Because I can actually see scenarios where the athlete would want to not disclose things. But just theoretically speaking, like you setting Altra out of this, setting Tara out of this, maybe with you, Kelly, you're in this space on a daily basis now. What are your thoughts here? Like, what is the rationale for it?
No,
what wouldn't want to be disclosed?
I'll have to send you an NDA. Hold on. All joking aside, this is a really great conversation that I suspect a lot of us just assume that it's from the brand, but that's not true at all. There are a couple athletes that are very top of the mountain tier in our community that before, I had intro kind of discussion with them, and then it was like, all right, I'm going to send you an NDA. and it's a mutual NDA. And unless it's, I actually had one athlete send it back to me because I had sent her just a sort of one-sided NDA for myself, and she was like, "This doesn't protect me. I need a mutual." And I was like, "Oh my God, I sent you the wrong doc." So it is absolutely paramount to athletes, depending on who the athlete is and where they're at, and just their level of privacy and what they're comfortable with as a human. Some people are like, "I don't care." I care because I want that athlete, whether they realize it or not, I want them to know that our conversations are safe no matter what it is. And they might not seem like they need it now, but at some point as their career evolves, that will weigh more to them. And it's to answer your question, it's the brand, it's the athlete, it's the agent. One thing that I absolutely, and Abby and I have talked about this extensively, is if I have an athlete that I'm representing, especially if they're brand new and we're just kind of starting to get into it, and they're like, "Great, I'm ready to go, let's do this." One of the things we discuss in my NDA is, even if you have let's say Abby is the coach and she's an attorney, and she's she's like, "Oh, just send me your contract, I'll check it out." No, you either work with me wholeheartedly and let me do the best I can for you and do my job for you, or you're more than welcome to share it with your coach and whoever else you want, but then I'm out. Because too many hands in that can often kind of stir that pot in a way where there's just kind of spider web of communication, things aren't connecting, and often, although well-intended, advice that is given is not accurate. So I have my athletes sign an NDA for a lot of reasons, and one of them is that.
One thing that really interests me about NDAs is it's a little bit of a tragedy of the commons situation, where right now it may benefit everybody, athlete, agent, coach, brand, for all of this information to remain private. But if we want to bargain for everybody to be making more money, athletes, agents, and then ultimately the brands, because why else are they signing these athletes if not to get more in return than they're giving? It really would benefit us to be more open, because then everyone can bargain to be paid more. And it's exactly like a typical workforce. If I, in my job as an editor, knew how much the next editor next to me was making, I could use that potentially to leverage for more money, but they very deliberately don't tell you those things so that you can't do that.
I was just going to ask, in a world of total transparency where everything was disclosed, what would be one of the first fundamental things to change in these contracts? Do you think it would be just a generally bigger market, and like baseline, everyone would have a slightly more padded contract?
Oof. This is an interesting question, because just because an NDA, in a world where NDA wouldn't be here, that does not give a brand more money. Just want to be really clear about that. We don't lift an NDA and all of a sudden banks, just give money to brands. There's
Right,
still
right, of course not.
this shit has to come from somewhere. So let's be honest about that. The budget is what it is, and then you fill those gaps in between there. So there's a lot of moving parts with that, Finn. And if you, let's say, they're like, "Well, I'm worth more than that, and this brand isn't going to pay me that, but they pay Finn that, so I'm going to walk." That's fine, but someone else is just going to take your spot. So we have to be able to stomach that. And it's not a business that's for the faint of heart. Contract season is sticky. So I do think the biggest thing would likely be monetary, annual base salary. But when that's not met, if everyone was able to see all the other negotiation points in there, that they're like, "Okay, if I can't get it here, maybe I can get it here." So I suspect everyone might think it's the money of the annual base salary, but it's likely going to be all of the other things that help pad that first, if that makes sense.
I guess, and just to close up this particular section of the conversation, I'm really curious about the possible outcomes that we have to work with this. So I'm wondering if this news, Abby, that you reported, does this necessarily empower athletes to ask for more money in the future? Like, does the public reporting of this contract change anything either in this year or next year? or is it just a nice to know and we're kind of still in the same spot that we were?
My guess is in the short term, it doesn't change much. It's the end of the year. A lot of brands are pulling back. A lot of athletes aren't getting re-signed right now. It's honestly a pretty brutal time to try to be a professional trail runner. It seems like, just looking at the landscape, Tara is an exception because she did something so exceptionally well that no one else has ever done before. I do think in the long term that she is a game changer on a lot of levels, including here, and that she will ultimately help to push the sport forward, especially for women. One final point on the NDA side, you look
Sure.
at any big sport, baseball, basketball, football, all of those contracts are public. And that the public nature does play a really dynamic role in where athletes end up going, what teams they go to, who they sign with. And you have to imagine that would happen in trail running too. If it was all public,
Yeah.
and you were able to leverage that with another brand, other brands who knew how much you were making with your current brand, we'd see a lot more, I think we'd see a lot more movement. That's just my guess.
Okay. But also you're suggesting this is not necessarily good news for everyone. Like income inequality is kind of a thing in trail. There's a 1 to 5% that's doing amazing and it's murkier.
Yeah.
We get kind of below that strata.
Yeah, I remember reading an article about professional triathlon maybe 10 years ago, and I always say trail ultra running feels like it's about 10 years behind triathlon. Even now, we're seeing that with like the PTO coming out with these huge prize purses for these new race series and things. That hasn't hit trail running yet. And right now in trail running, you're making most of your money from your sponsorships. But I remember 10 years ago reading about this stratified professional landscape where there are a couple athletes doing really, really well, and almost everybody trying to make ends meet with second jobs, et cetera. And that, to me, and Kelly, you know more than I do, but from what I've seen, it feels like that's kind of where we are. Where yes, there is actually, a sizable middle class of people making 50 to 80K, maybe a living wage, depending on where they live, maybe not. But most people not making anywhere near a living wage, and then a couple who are doing really well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Abby, I think this was offered to you by Altra in the reporting, but there was a pretty wide contract range, 100K to 250K. And I just, off the top of my head, that's encompassing the middle class, the upper middle class,
Yep.
the lower 1%. Why such a range? How is, in their mind, how is that range helpful in this context?
Yeah, I have to be careful with what I say. I don't want to say too much and get anybody in trouble. I will tell you that they would have been happier if I didn't report any range at all.
Okay.
And I came back and said to them, if I can't report a range, I'm not interested in writing the story, because then it's suddenly me just writing a fluff piece for Ultra, and I'm just not going to do that. To the power in the story to me was the fact that Tara negotiated her worth, and she did this amazing feat, and she's getting paid for it. And they understood that. I think they, they're trying to manage a lot of different needs, including the needs of other athletes on the team. That's a piece of it. Their own needs, their own budget. So that was ultimately the range that I was allowed to write.
I think the last thing that I want to ask here is just around the normalcy of these 6-figure deals. Is Tara's contract here, is it representative of how rapidly and dramatically this market is growing for her caliber of talent? Like, is this just the baseline here, Kelly? Or, what are your thoughts there? Like, can we just expect that if you are someone like Tara who has accomplished what she has accomplished, this is sort of like your floor for how you can make a living in the sport?
Oh, gosh, Tara is unique in that, and this is really important to remember for anyone listening, this is not simply about her athletic ability. Tara has a significant YouTube channel. So
I should add that into the story. It's like a point.
Abby's like, dang it. Yeah, it's not just social media with her as far as Instagram or like X or whatever the heck it's called these days, but Tara is constantly hustling to be on podcasts. She was on Good Morning America. She works harder than a lot of athletes I know off of the trail. This is not just about what she brings to the table with the trail. So a lot of her value, let's say Ultra, if they took someone on initially their first year or two, they might have to coach them on like, hey, if you can do videos or you can do TikTok or YouTube or whatever that looks like, that would be great and be helpful for you. Tara already has that.
In addition to that, you can't underscore enough how critical it was that she set the AT in ultras. She set that record in ultras.
Yeah.
And I talked to her about this at length because I was really interested in that piece. Like ultras are very polarizing shoes. They have diehard fans and they have people who would never touch them because of their traditional zero drop, although they have now moved into doing minimal 4mm drop shoes. And I wrote about this in the story. She talks about how the one time she tried to wear something other than ultras a couple years ago, she immediately got injured and she switched back into ultras and had no problems. And she attributes the fact that she was able to stay healthy on the AT largely to the shoes. And that is such a powerful endorsement for the brand. And in my opinion, yeah, and I mean, how amazing for Altra that they can now capitalize on that. Ultras are the most worn shoes on the AT. The two models, I think the Lone Peak are number one, and then the Olympus are number two for thru hikers on the AT. And now she's also doing well in ultras racing, ultra 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 races, not to be confused with the brand, which sounds the same.
But the most popular shoe on the trail and the fastest.
Yeah.
And it's on their sponsor athlete.
And she stayed healthy. When you look at a Scott Jurek or Carl Metzer or all these other people who have run fast on the AT, and they were just battered by the end, trying to get to the finish without totally falling apart. And Tara was able to stay healthy.
Yeah,
that is,
it's important,
and especially given that ultras are such a unique shoe. The wide toe box, the traditional zero drop, like it's like a lifestyle. And Tara she's a diehard for that lifestyle. She's fully embraced it, and it really works for her.
Yeah. And Abby, you mentioned it, like the Appalachian Trail and how much this factors here. I think of Tara, she's a multidiscipline athlete. She's just as much interested in the long trails as she is in the traditional racing scene. And as I was reading this news, a part of me wondered how much of this, and Kelly, this is sort of directed to you, how much of this contract news is a win for the thru hiking community and a win for athletes that are primarily focused in the multi-day scene, as opposed to people that are just trying to win UTMB in Western States every year. Does Tara open the floodgates for people that are like, I'm actually going to base my year around trying to set the Arizona Trail FKT or the Long Trail or the Colorado Trail? Like, just based on what you know in terms of what brands want these days, has Tara validated that can be just as compelling from an ROI marketing standpoint as going for a golden ticket?
Yeah, I love that question. One, my inbox is flooded with people who are thru hikers who would love to talk about this. So yeah, I think it is. It gives hope and excitement and makes that a little bit sexier, right? Because life is not just about racing 100 miles or 100K. There's a whole lot more going out around that, and there are also some well-known 100-mile specialists that have reached out to me over the past 24 hours that have said, hey, I would really thank you kind of for inspiring me or reminding me that adding something like a multi-day, a long trail FKT into my goals for 2025, like that's something that can be done. Like we can do both. So I think it is, yes, I do think that it's adding some excitement to that and kind of making a little more rock and roll. And there are some brands who don't want anything to do with it, and that's fine. But I will say this. There was one brand who told me a couple months ago they weren't interested in working with a thru hiker in regard to Tara, and they sent me an email today.
Oh.
It's obviously too late. You missed the boat. But yeah, they were...
market forces.
Yep. Yeah. So I know, Ab. We have a lot to talk about.
Well, this is really interesting because I wonder if it's a little bit of if you build it, they will come, and what do brands care about? Exposure for their athletes and for their products. And I wonder if media reported more on these types of efforts, which in the media's credit, it does. I mean, again, Tara's effort was written up in the New York Times, and most races aren't written up in there. But I wonder if we did, as a collective media, give these efforts more attention, whether brands would care more about them as well.
Well, and one thing that I really liked in your reporting, Abby, was you acknowledged that for a long time, even until now, very few athletes made the long trail scene in their career. I mean, Heather Anderson did it, Joe McConaughey's done it, but for the most part, it's been the swan song. It's been the Scott Jurek
Yes.
and the Carl Meltzers. This is their send off. Even look at Jen Farr Davis. She never registered another performance after her AT. She went and started a guiding company, did the speaking tours, Tim Olson. And so, and again, maybe this is a question to both of you. One of the other things I was thinking about is like, what is the value? Like, does Tara necessarily need to continue performing, or are there other ways that she can deliver value to Altra that go outside of needing to set another long trail FKT or, again, win Hard Rock? I'm so curious here.
Can I answer that?
Kelly.
Yeah. Please.
She absolutely does. I don't want to say she's a child, but she's only 31 years old. She's hungry to race. She's hungry to do 100. She's hungry to run fast. So, I mean, I guess she could stop, but I would also, if I were Altra, not be super stoked signing an athlete this significant of contract only to have them just sit around and eat bonbons. So she probably doesn't have to, but she wants to, and I think there's something. It would be unfortunate for that to turn the other direction.
It is interesting, though. I think there is a difference between need and want, and it's very clear talking to her that, as you said, Kelly, she is ravenous to go race more, especially racing. That's what she seems to be really passionate about right now. But does she need to? That's who knows. And I'm glad, Finn, that you brought up the part about most athletes moving to these long records at the end of their career, because we're really kind of in this unprecedented state with Tara. And again, I mean, this is actually something I was interested in reporting the story. I love the fact that she flipped that script and she was like, I'm going to go after this at the beginning of my career and see what happens. Like, mad props to her. That takes a lot of daring to do something like that. And yeah, I'm psyched to elevate it.
I'm not sure if we can talk about this publicly, but Kelly, are you able to discuss how a brand like Altra measures the success of this type of deal? Like when you're the flagship athlete, what that looks like how do you judge success year over year? Like what are the KPIs, all that kind of stuff?
Oh gosh, I think, well, for something like this, let's say it's kind of what Abby had already mentioned, that shoe, it's all about sales at the end of the day. I mean, no matter what anyone says, if someone is like, well, that brand's only worried about money, as a small business owner, everything comes down to that in some way. So what sells the most? Like, that's part of it. That's a huge part of it. And Tara sells shoes. Abby's already mentioned, the Altra, 2 different models are the number one shoe used on the AT, and Tara is a huge billboard for that, which pushes sales. So it's the boxes, as far as to answer your question, is the person marketable? Yes. Is the person, it all then goes back to product, which is, someone turn the lights out on Abby. Product. So if that, which means, does the product work for that athlete? Does the athlete, through their social channels and their marketability, do they push sales for that product? And then the third thing that most brands, so it's product, marketing, and then the third one is always community. For most brands, these are kind of the 3 boxes that are checked from how brands pick an athlete, and then that makes it a little easier to measure them. The last one is community. So does Tara represent that community? Not just the community that we're a part of, which seems huge but is little, but the community that purchases those shoes, which is, quite frankly, the bulk of the shoes that she's used. That community is the thru hiker. So she checks
and the hiker.
In the hike, exactly.
The casual weekend hiker, which is the biggest demo.
She is at the top of that. So if you go through each one of those things and then you can give just like an elevator pitch of each thing of how Tara fits into those boxes, she's top tier of every single one of those.
In addition to that, and I don't know, this is pure, well, that's not true actually. Talking to people at Altra, they made it very clear to me, they're kind of at this inflection point in the brand where they're coming out with shoes with drop. They've brought in a new head of product from Nike. She was at Nike for 20 years. And her name's Kylie. What's her last name? Kelly?
Oh, I forget. Sorry.
It's in the article. Just go read the article.
Live with the show notes.
Kylie, according to Jen, who's the president of Altra, Kylie recognizes that Altra shoes traditionally are not the sexiest shoes on the market. That wide toe box, just there's a reason that heels have that point at the toe, you know? And Kylie and the team are coming in and they're saying, how can we make our shoes cool? How can we make them appeal to women? If you design for women, women have a much more innate, according to them, an innate sense of fashion and what looks cool. You design for women, you design for everybody. So that's what's happening behind the scenes on the product side. They're really having this kind of rebirth as a brand a bit as they try to widen their audience. Then in marketing, they're making this huge push to diversify their product base, diversify the sport. They talked a lot about engaging communities that traditionally haven't been in the sport. How do you bring them in? Well, Tara, fresh face to the brand, young woman coming in, she's going to play a pivotal role in this sort of rebrand for Altra. So I think you also just can't underestimate that power too. You think about the athletes that have traditionally been on the team. It's a lot of, I love everyone on the Altra team, for the record, lots of great athletes, but they do have some older athletes who've been around forever and they're not getting, as far as I know, they're going to remain on the team as well. And they have a place on the team, but adding Tara to that collection is a statement of, hey, we're trying to reach a new audience, a new generation as well.
Kelly, I know you have a lot of experience on multi-day projects, and I was an avid follower of Tara's journey on the AT this year, and I was, given that she was already on the Altra roster, I was surprised at how self-reliant she had to be from a content production standpoint. And do you have any insight, or can you share any insight into whether she'll be additionally supported if she goes for another long trail like the Pacific Crest Trail? Like, will she just be putting the phone in front of her face and doing vlogs, or will we have like a more built out box-to-box film studios company with her,
Yeah, this is a good conversation. Thank you for asking it. And I'll say this, Altra had no idea what they had. And in their defense, there's no way they could have. Tara was on her own during that because it was literally the first contract she's ever had as a pro, and it was 1 year, and it was with Altra. And Altra, during the time that Tara was on the AT, they were in Chamonix for UTMB. So all of a sudden it was like, oh crap, this this girl's doing it. Like, what? This is bananas. So that's why it was not anything like, hey, you're on your own, for anyone that's listening. I suspect they wish that they had more people, boots on the ground there. This is also a kind of transition year for Altra. For anyone who knows, behind the scenes, they have a new athlete manager. There's a lot of just different moving parts. This team is all like brand new, so there was a lot going on. And something tells me she kind of got lost in the shuffle, to be honest with you. And they did the best that they could when they were like, oh my gosh, we totally, I don't know, like, lack of a better way to put it, we're not there, we're not supporting her in the way that we should be right now. So that's why that happened. And Absolutely. Tara has whatever support she needs from the brand for the life of this contract, for anything that she has going on. And I know that they will keep that promise, but I'm also here to constantly poke at them like a gnat to say, this is what we need now, kind of thing. So, yeah, that will change and already has immediately. It's a complete 180.
It's interesting though, because people love that authenticity and vulnerability of Tara just talking into the camera. There's a lot of power to that. And I would
Yeah.
imagine that her doing that really helped her in this negotiation phase. And I, as a fan of hers, hope that she doesn't stop doing that, because it's such a real window into her life. And you know, these really well produced films obviously have a place, and I love those too. But I think the two can coexist in a really beautiful way, and you end up kind of triangulating a much richer understanding of what those athletes were going through when you have both.
I love that, Abby. It's that organic nature of it, right? Um,
Yep.
I suspect, Finn, to answer your question a little deeper, if they said, hey, we're going to send an entire film crew out and have this, that, and the other. And as you said, I've been on projects where it was, where I was literally hired as a chef. So I
Yeah.
know what that looks like. I suspect there's a lot of things Tara would decline. She would accept gear. She would accept more footwear. She would accept human beings from the actual Altra team to come out and help her pace and assist her. But I think there's something to what Abby said. I don't know that she wants a camera following her around 24/7, because that's also just not who Tara is. So I think, they'll negotiate that and work that out as it comes.
This is a question for both of you. Maybe Abby, to you first. Another thing that I wondered after reading the article was how the value of agents would be reperceived in the near future. Like I think we've had this debate for a long time about like agents, necessity or luxury. And I think that this is kind of one of those watershed moments where people stop and think again. As you've
Oh,
had
yes.
conversations in the industry, where do you currently fall on this? And Kelly, I'd love to get your perspective too after.
I think Kelly is so prescient entering this space. I mean, what a genius to see this void in the landscape. I mean, there are basically no agents in ultra trail running, and Kelly knows everyone. She knows every brand. It's a match made in heaven to bring her in, and sure enough, boom. I mean, I was kind of joking with Kelly, like she became an agent and immediately signs the biggest deal in ultra's history. I mean, clearly, first of all, I don't think anyone could just waltz in and do this. It's a really, really hard job. From my understanding on the outside, it takes immense skill and a backbone and deep industry knowledge. You have to be very well trusted by both parties. Kelly has all of that, and so she's able to do a remarkable job with this. And when I told Kelly, I'm like, we're going to publish this story, and your phone's going to be ringing off the hook, because I do think that she is able to just totally transform the outcome for athletes if she's brought in.
I don't know how to respond to that, Abby. Thank you.
Yeah.
like
Um,
publicly embarrassing you on a Tuesday afternoon.
I appreciate that so much. I think right now, it's beneficial for Tara to have an agent. She has a lot going on, and she is overwhelmed, and she's never really had to have these conversations before. So that is really truly helpful for her at this point. Do I think everyone should have an agent? No. I think some people are at certain parts of their career where they don't need an agent. Maybe another part they might feel like they need someone, and I've kind of fallen the athlete agent / manager. So there's a little bit more assistance, or a lot more assistance, that comes with like a full-on management kind of thing. And right now, it's helpful for Tara. What I don't want to see happen is someone say, oh my gosh, I'm just going to get an agent and I'm going to call this person, and because she did this for this other athlete, that I will get the same. That's not realistic.
Right.
And it's the quote I posted today on Instagram: hustle beats talent when talent doesn't hustle.
Saw that.
And
Well, yeah. To that point, I think we really just have to hammer everyone over the head with the fact that Tara did something that literally no one has ever done before. She is in a class of her own. And I mean, yeah, that speaks for itself. Not everybody is in that bucket. And my understanding of the landscape is there are just a couple Taras out there who probably haven't fully earned their worth, and they're leaving potential sponsorships on the table, especially outside of the running industry. And then there are a lot of people who are not, they're just not going to get paid enough for it to be worth it to give a cut to an agent anyway. But then there's that middle ground of people, especially people who might not understand the landscape well enough to even know what they're worth, not know what brands are looking for athletes, like just connecting those dots. And it's definitely not having a full athlete manager type situation, but just someone to help them connect the dots, I think would be really helpful for that middle tier.
That's my favorite kind of work to do, to just work with someone with a few conversations and just kind of consult with them and help them wrap their head around different things they can do. I was talking, Matt Daniels is one of my full-time clients as an agent manager. And I asked him the other day, there was a brand that he was that reached out to him, and the athlete manager for that brand happens to be a friend of his. And I was like, well, do you want to just do this one on your own and just let me know when you need help? And he said, no, I don't, because I know myself well enough to know that this person's a friend, so I'll cave and I won't negotiate and I won't ask for what I'm worth. I won't go at it hard enough. And I loved that so much, knowing where he's wise enough to know where his kind of strengths and weaknesses are. And he's like, I need you to do this for me, especially with this one. So I love that conversation. And that's one of the reasons I love working with Matt. So
that brings up a really interesting point. The trail running world is so small that pretty much everyone knows everyone. And it can feel like this very chummy, well, I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back type of situation. And that can be very hard for athletes in this position trying to get a contract. And actually, when I signed a contract, this was a million gazillion years ago now, that's what I was told by the athlete manager. Oh, well, we don't want you to have an agent because this is just friends, between friends, and in hindsight, I'm like, I'm such an idiot. That was them just trying to have control over me. But at the time it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that they like me enough to want to be my friend,
Yeah, this is a whole other podcast, Finn.
Yeah.
Abby and I, a couple of weeks ago, were chatting about, I was really fired up because there were a couple smaller brands that had reached out to Tara, and they were like, just listen to us, talk to us, just hear us out. We can do this, this, and this. And I was so fired up because in my mind, it was disrespectful, and it offended me that someone, just to get a quiver athlete on their team, would derail a 6-figure salary for an athlete and uproot this entire thing. Also, they could put them on their team and pay them a quarter of what this athlete was getting paid. And that's where it's important for me anyway. And where it makes a difference is this. I am not emotionally attached to feeling the need to be nice to someone on the other end of that call. Even, it is often someone that I've known for years, this with a brand or athlete manager. I am a really nice person, but if you try and screw with one of my athletes' contracts and their lives and their career, it's going to go upside down.
This is maybe to close the book on the agent conversation.
I feel my heart rate going up.
Well, I can totally foresee a scenario where people who are listening, athletes, they oversimplify the equation and they just connect the dots and say, if I just go for the AT next year, set the FKT, then I can start to bargain for these crazy contracts.
Yeah.
And I think both of you have explained that it's way more sophisticated than that. Tara's got a lot of the built-in social channels that she's worked on for years, etc. So I don't want the AT to become the killing fields in 2025 where 40 athletes go out and probably none of them make it,
In addition to that, I think it's important to remember that Tara, it was a very unique situation where a man held the record. Tara, as a woman, came in, she broke that record.
Yeah.
No one really knew who she was when she did it. Now that she's done that, it's been done. And if someone else comes and does the same thing, the precedent was already set and it's not going to be as cool and remarkable. That's just the reality of the situation. Even though the time will be even faster and arguably more impressive, it's the context is so important. And that's what I love about the FKT scene is it's all building one up on the next. And every person who sets that record is defying the limits of what people thought were possible. Okay, last thought on the AT though. I think there are a couple races, records, events in ultra running that capture the public's attention in a way that most races don't. And if Jasmine Paris was interested in having sponsorships, I think we would have seen something very similar from her after Barclays. And it's just really, I find this really fascinating how, for whatever reason, there's these couple things that just stick in the public's imagination as being this unbelievable thing, where we know, like people in the scene know that setting the course record at UTMB, like that's just as impressive as a lot of these other big things. I don't want to say it's as impressive as Jasmine finishing Barclays because all hail, that was an unbelievable performance. But you know what I'm saying? There's an undue influence perhaps that we give to these certain things that have just skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Barclays, because of that Netflix documentary.
It is bizarre that there's almost two separate checklists for what gets you internal respect in the community and external respect. Like maybe the list externally is the AT, Barkley. I guess Barkley. The AT is crossover for sure, but like Barkley, the AT, the Moab 240, Badwater, and then internally it's like Western States, UTMB. You throw the AT in there too. Like, but they can be different, which is fascinating.
I remember when Claire Gallagher, who's a very good friend of mine, won the Leadville 100. What year was that? Maybe 2017. And living in Colorado, that was the biggest deal ever. Probably more than when she won Western States 2 years later or CCC the next year. And that really struck me because, you know, Claire would admit the competition was not stiff when she won. She's now won it twice. Both years, that was not as impressive as a performance as her CCC win or Western States win. But for whatever reason, people love Leadville and it has captured the imagination. And also, I'm so sorry if I don't know if this is going to be on YouTube.
No,
lights keep going on and off, and it's very distracting
light
for
bulb
everyone.
ideas as we go on. No, it's fitting. It's fitting.
Corporate America trying to save money, but probably burning more money by having the lights flicker on and off. That's got to be worse than just keeping them on.
I don't want to keep you both too long, but you think in all media companies face this challenge of sort of balancing the needs of the algorithm versus the needs of public interest and just like good journalism. When you look at the appetite for athlete signing news, business of sport content, what's been the feedback internally and externally around this type of reporting and whether we'll see more of it from you from outside, et cetera?
I personally love it, and I kind of just do what I love. So I plan on doing more of it. I'm really the only running editor that writes breaking news. I think it's really fun. I also, this story is doing great. So I think it does prove that with the right story, all goals are aligned. Okay. Did that answer your question?
No, and honestly, just curious too, because like I said, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, this is one of the, if it might be the first contract that I'm aware of that was like publicly reported on by anyone in the space. I mean, we've had some athlete announcement stuff that kind of happens as a byproduct of a conversation, like, oh, by the way, I just signed with Hoka or Adidas or whatever, but pretty cool that this was like a standalone piece of content.
Well, again, I found this to be a really interesting story, just given who Tara is and what she's done and the fact that she was setting this precedent at Altra. And, you know, if some random athlete who's been with one brand for 5 years and then signs with another brand for $10,000 more, I'm not going to report on that. Like, no one cares. That's not interesting. It's these stories that are moving the needle in some way. And, you know, it's funny though that you mention that there haven't been any other stories like this that you know of in the space, because you look at the track and road scene and these stories are coming out
Everywhere.
left and right. All these
The NIL
athletes, like
deals.
Graham Blanks yesterday, who's a senior at Harvard, he just signed with New Balance. That was all over the news. Parker Valby, when she signed with New Balance, that was all over the news. And actually, that story really inspired the Parker story. Really inspired me with Tara, because the two are in some ways quite analogous. Where Parker signed a very big contract, somewhere between 600 and 800K, as a senior out of college to go run with New Balance in Boston, and it's, I mean, she's setting a new precedent for what's possible for seniors.
I will say this too, quick, Finn.
Sure.
There were a couple of people that commented on your story, Abby, on the Instagram post under Run, and that mentioned that this seemed like this piece was part of the Altra deal, and I wanted to assure them that it was absolutely not.
Definitely not. Definitely
Part
not.
of my role with the athletes that I manage is to get them as much media and PR as possible. So this was all between Abby and I, and it was after Abby and I discussed the possibility of this happening that upon Abby's suggestion, I shared the Parker Valby story with the Altra team and said, hey, would you be okay if we did this? This is what Abby wants to do. We'd love to do it. Let us know what you think. So that's how that all came about. This had nothing to do. Altra was the last to know, quite frankly.
I think it's so funny that anyone would think that, because as I said earlier, I wasn't gonna run the story if they didn't let me give enough details to make it interesting. Like, I can assure you, I did not get paid any money other than, the salary I get through my full-time job at Outside to write this story. That was totally irrelevant.
Well, this reminds me. So my colleague and I, Brett Hornig, we did a little mini episode after the Western States Hard Rock Lottery, and that we were shocked, or we were amazed at how many people tuned into that, and we're just watching a live stream about a race that hasn't even happened yet. And bringing it to this context, we kind of put the idea forward that, you look at other sports like the MLB, the NFL, the NBA, they have these live drafts. And in order for brands to get more mileage out of these signings, what if everyone came together on the same day in the same room, brought the media, brought the fans in, and they all announced signings? Like, how much more traction and mileage would this stuff get if we just had a single signing day in our sport?
I would love that.
I just love how Finn is such a dreamer. Like, you are just here to turn trail running into basketball, and I am here to watch it. I love it. It's great. I don't think it's going to happen, but I love the
It won't happen. It won't happen.
Brands were able to get themselves together with their budget and everything aligned and make this happen on an actual day and not give everyone a heart attack. I'll agree with something Abby said a few minutes ago. This season in particular, this year, has been so anxiety inducing because it's just this limbo that's stretched out more than ever. So if they could bring that all into one day, I am here for it. I will personally cater it for free.
Well, here's the problem. Unlike basketball, where we're talking about the NBA, it's one league, they're all under the same TV contract. It's all one orchestrated system. Trail running is so fractured, and everyone has their own agenda, and brands aren't making money off of TV deals. They're making money through selling their shoes. And we're never, in this current system, we are never going to have a unified mission or vision like you do in football, basketball, baseball.
Before we go, Abby, you reported on some specific categories of the contract that, Kelly, I would love to get some more perspective on. One was safeguards around pre-race obligations, which I find fascinating, selfishly, because as someone in the media, I could be one of the losers in these scenarios where it's like, sorry, we can't stop by the studio before Western States. Like, we don't have the time. Talk about what this means and sort of the rationale around that.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that so many athletes have, and coaches also feel this for their athletes when they're like, oh my gosh, they have to do all these appearances back to back right before UTMB, or like press, or like go to these panels and whether it's Western States or UTMB or fill in the blank, where the athletes should be off their feet and resting and quite frankly, like just turning their brain off. But one, athletes are not aware that you can actually say no to that, or you can say beforehand, like a month before the race, when your brand manager, athlete manager starts saying, hey, we're going to do this and this, to let them know beforehand, like, hey, I know we're all going to be at the same place, we're going to be at this team house or in the same, athlete village. These are the days and times I'm available. So what I really love to add to a contract is I just put it in there. That these are the things, like this is where an athlete's at, like they're not available to do these things, or they're not available to spend 12 hours on a photo shoot running up and down, so a photographer can get a specific shot of these shoes when they should really have only run like 10 miles this week, and they've run 10 miles in one day for a photo shoot. Like that's not doing anyone good. It's irresponsible and out of touch. So I'm not down with that at all. So sometimes the athlete does not feel comfortable saying that. They don't have the knowledge that they can decline it. No one's going to pull your contract because you said I'm only doing this for 2 hours. But if you put it in the body of a contract, or at least have like a different, like, something somewhere, some language that says that, like, here's a whole different sheet for my media and photography, what I'm available for and what my limitations are, like, then you're safeguarding yourself. And I don't have to worry about like something happening if I'm not there. If I know an athlete's going to do something and I'm not going to be there, then I just send that attachment as a reminder, or I'm like, here, give this to the photographer you're working with today, so they know before it even happens.
And one thing, Kelly, that you brought up when I talked to you about this that I thought was a really good point is when you sign your contract, you know everyone at the company. You're friends with them. They're great. They have your back. You don't know if they're going to be around next year. And so putting these things down on paper, locking it in so that no matter who's in charge, you're good to go. It's very wise.
Yeah, you just never know. Someone might move to a different company. Someone might move up in a different position. And not everybody's up, we inherit things through our jobs in life that you are just like, I had no idea. So it's likely not anything that's ill-intended, but you have to advocate for yourself.
This was not included in the article, but it's, again, Abby, you're going to make fun of me because I've been watching a bunch of baseball, football, other sports docs. But when you sign a deal of relative magnitude in your industry, one of the biggest questions that comes up is financial literacy and managing a fairly big chunk of change. Think about putting money in a mutual fund or in an IRA, etc. Do you like to play that role too with athletes, or do you refer to them to financial advisors? How does that all work?
I do. Yeah, there's a few things. So one is, and it really kind of all happens when I'm getting to know that athlete initially. If you are an athlete that is new to, like, all of a sudden this rocket ship of media, and often someone might come to me and say, oh my gosh, I had this podcast or this interview and I didn't know how to field this question, or this happened. So I'm like, all right, let's get you some media training. So I connect them with someone there. I might connect them more often than not. Someone goes to a sports psychologist to help get them out of their head. Another person might go to Tara's moving to Colorado, so I immediately called Lauren Daniels to ask her some questions. But what they need, they'll, like, it's a very individual, but absolutely I would connect them with someone that's like a financial advisor. Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I know we're at the top of the hour. This has been an amazing conversation. I want to leave both of you with the last words. Abby, just reflecting on the article, the experience, the news, any final thoughts that you want to leave listeners and viewers with about how to interpret this, takeaways, stuff like that?
I feel like I've hit everyone over the head with my message several times, so I apologize. But I guess I'll do it one more time, which really is, like, Tara is such a unique and special athlete. And when she set that record, I was hopeful as a fan of the sport that somebody would see the power not only in that effort, but then also in both her future as a competitive athlete and as an ambassador to the sport. And I'm just psyched that Altra saw that and that they're really going to empower her. And that was something that both Colby, the athlete manager, and Jen reiterated over and over. I almost, looking back through the transcript of the conversation, I was like, did they like have like talking points in front of them? So they said they were so aligned. And I know they didn't because Jen was in her car and yeah, they clearly didn't, but they both reiterated to me that they were so impressed with Tara's authenticity. And that was really the driving force behind this contract. And that was just so refreshing to hear. And Jen said, and I quoted her in the article by saying this, like, Altra knows that consumers these days see through inauthenticity. And we've been at this really interesting point in the sport the last couple of years where you're seeing trail brands, running brands, kind of all having these ubiquitous marketing campaigns where they have this big athlete team and they all wear the same thing and they all have one unified message. And it's almost taking the athlete and stripping them of who they are and then plastering the brand's campaign onto them. And I thought it was so cool that Ultra is doing the exact opposite with Tara. And they're saying, how can we leverage who Tara is to build up our brand and to build her up in the process? Because as we build her up, we too are building ourselves up. Yeah, so I thought that was really, really cool to see. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more of it in the future.
I love that, Abby. And you had mentioned that several times before you even wrote the article, how impressed you were with that. So yeah, I think when you have an athlete that does what Tara did for the size of the contract she was in when she did it, that's some fire. You know, most people are like, don't perform until they have more zeros behind their name. So she is truly unique. And I also would be, it would be unfortunate if I did not mention how impressed I personally was with this Altra team. I've worked with Altra for the better part of this decade, on and off with different iterations of this team. And this one sees things in a much different way, all the way from Jen to Colby. Even when we had things that we didn't agree on or had hiccups, it was like, all right, how can we? They were so receptive and professional and compassionate about, right, we can't do this. Can we meet here? What can we work on to get this? And it was really, truly unique and professional. And I just want to make sure to acknowledge that.